Does anyone here have a tendency to start projects that you don't always finish? Anyone willing to admit that? A simple walk through my house or my office would produce a fairly lengthy list of things that are sitting in places where they should not be, that are waiting to get relocated. On my desk, there's several stacks of paper that have been waiting to be filed or scanned into my computer or thrown away or something. In my basement is a picture frame that I'm halfway through fixing and have been for far longer than I'd like to admit. We have a couple of cans of paint that have probably been in our house for more than a year, waiting to patch a little bit of water damage in one room, and it's just kind of there, and you'll get to it. It's like you kind of take steps towards taking care of something, but it's easy to get overwhelmed. It's easy to bite off more than you can chew. It's easy to give up. Admitting things like this is a little difficult, but I suspect that all of us would have similar lengthy lists, projects we've started but not finished, objects waiting to be put away or donated or thrown away or fixed. And I suspect if that's true of the physical things in your home or shed or office, it's probably equally true with the more personal internal goals that you've set, the desires that you've had, the ambitions that you've wanted to pursue that have at some point along the way been placed on the metaphorical shelf and forgotten or neglected. How many times have you started to lose weight and possibly made a little progress only to be undone by a large piece of chocolate cake or something like that? Perhaps you've been determined to live on a budget, and that lasts for 1 or 2 or 3 months until, well, I just got to go out, or I just got to do this thing, or I didn't expect that to break, and then the budget falls apart, and you kind of give up and go back to a life where you just kind of are crossing your fingers that what you earn will make up for what you spend, and you kind of go blind month to month. I suspect, we're in our 3rd week of January, so I wonder how many of us in here have once again taken a stab at a read the Bible in a year kind of plan, and you're kind of plugging your way through Genesis for the however many times that you've tried to do that, but somewhere along the way, in between descriptions of the tabernacle in Exodus or instructions about what to do with mildew in the middle of Leviticus, somewhere in there you kind of fall off the wagon and you wait till the next January to get another start at things. That there are few virtues as powerful and as necessary as perseverance. The American Heritage Dictionary defines perseverance as steady persistence in adhering to a course of action, a belief, or a purpose. Steadfastness. Wiktionary, which is an online dictionary similar to Wikipedia, defines perseverance as continuing in a course of action without regard to discouragement, opposition, or previous failure. To persevere is to press on, no matter the discouragement, no matter the difficulty, no matter the opposition. Nobody accidentally perseveres. It just doesn't work that way. You don't accidentally finish well. The only way you persevere is on purpose. You've got a goal, you've got a plan, and you consistently remind yourself of your motivation, why you're doing what you're doing, and day after day, you determine to get back up and press on. A goal without perseverance is merely wishful thinking. This is week 4 in our sermon series that I've titled, Don't Waste Your Year. And in this series, I'm trying to essentially give us a roadmap for what does it look like to make this year count, and what would it look like to make your life count? What are the foundational kind of building blocks to a life lived well? In week 1, I challenged you to set goals. Make your life a quest and not merely an adventure. Have a purpose that you're living for, an overarching goal that everything else is aiming at, rather than just going from week to week, seeing what fun and exciting things come your way. Live with purpose. On week 2, I challenged you to form habits. Determine the little actions which, if repeatedly done, day after day, will move you closer and closer to accomplishing your goals. Last week, I challenged everyone to get support. Figure out the people that you will need in your life to come alongside you, to encourage you, to hold you accountable, whatever it takes, because we cannot live this life alone, and none of us will live into the fullness of what God wants and has called us towards by trying to do it all alone. The only way we're going to make the kind of progress we'd like towards our goals, that we're going to live a life well that honors God, is if we have people around us that to help pick us up, to encourage us, to motivate us when our motivation falls apart. Every week I've given an assignment. Week 1, write down one overarching goal and maybe a handful of smaller goals for different aspects of your life. Like take the time to think about it. What am I here on earth for? What do I want people to remember me by? What's the one thing that I want accomplished in my life? Write it down, set a big goal, and then set some little goals for what it would look like if different aspects of your life were lived well towards this bigger goal. Week 2, I challenged you to write down and start in on one habit for each of these goals. What's one thing for each of these goals that will, day after day, move you in the right direction? Last week, write down the name of one person connected to each of these goals and habits. One person that you think, without their help, this isn't going to happen, or one person that you think might be best suited to help you. Who's one person that you can share your goal with, who can be a source of accountability and encouragement? And then talk to that person and ask for their help. And so if you're just joining us today, if you're kind of coming in into the middle of this sermon series, or you've been with us and haven't taken steps, I encourage you to do something. I talked to someone last week. I'm not going to call them out by name. I love them. I had an interesting interaction where they said, I'm really enjoying this sermon series. I said, great, thank you so much. I said, have you written down any goals, started in on any habits? What was the answer? No. I said, oh. And I was just, kind of pondering about what does it mean to really like a sermon series when the very point of what it's all aimed at, you haven't done anything along those lines. And so that's no condemnation to them, because I suspect that they are not, number one, the only person in this room who would probably answer that the same way if I put you on the spot and said, oh, what goals have you set? What habits have you started? Oh, yeah, run and hide in the corner. Don't talk to me, Caleb. But I know for myself how easy it is. I spend a lot of time reading and studying the Bible and listening to sermons and trying to encourage myself. And I've been guilty as much as anyone of being a hearer of the word and not a doer. It's so easy for our level of obedience to start falling further and further behind our level of knowledge. It's really easy to overlearn and underdo. I think that's so backwards. It's so backwards from what it ought to be. Given a choice, I think it's far better to know a little bit, but to live faithfully on what you know, to put into action what you do know to be true and to live accordingly, than to know a lot and not put it into practice. Don't let your level of knowledge leave your level of obedience in the dust. Because when we're held accountable on the day of judgment, God isn't going to judge us by how much we've learned, but by what we've done. Have we lived out what we've known to be true? He doesn't care, using the language of this series, he doesn't care what goals we've set if we haven't persevered in pursuing those goals. So yes, set goals. And yes, think about the habits that will move you. And yes, find people to support you. but then start in and press on. There are few goals that can't be accomplished by simple actions repeated persistently and perseveringly. Samuel Johnson once remarked, he said, all the performances of human art at which we look with praise or wonder are instances of the resistless force of perseverance. He says, it is by this that the quarry becomes a pyramid and that distant countries are united with canals. If a man was to compare the single stroke of the pickaxe or of one impression of the spade with the general design and the last result, he would be overwhelmed by the sense of their disproportion. Yet those petty operations, incessantly continued, in time surmount the greatest difficulties. And mountains are leveled and oceans bounded by the slender force of human beings. He goes on to add, he said, few things are impossible to diligence and skill. Great works are performed not by strength, but by perseverance. If we're going to make this year count, if we're going to make our lives count, it will only be because after setting goals and after thinking about habits and after talking to a few friends, it's going to be because we actually started in and pressed on, that we committed ourselves to action, repeated, tenacious, persevering action. And our passage for this morning calls us to this very thing. The author of the book of Hebrews is writing to a group of people that started off strong, but then somewhere along the way got lazy, got tired, got discouraged. They lost their wartime mentality, their intensity, their urgency, and they began to coast. They'd figured out what many in America have figured out, that life is simply easier if you meander with the crowd rather than run the marathon of faith. And so throughout this book of Hebrews, there are these pokes and prods, these encouragements and exhortations. In Hebrews chapter 2, verse 1, he says that we must pay the most careful attention to what we have heard so that we do not drift away. He saw people in this gathering of believers, in this church, who, although they started off strong, they're drifting. And he's like, wake up, don't drift away from what this path that you've started on. In Hebrews 5, verse 12, he gets downright upset and bluntly tells them, he says, by this time you ought to be teachers, yet you need someone to teach you the elementary truths of God's word all over again. He says, you need milk, not solid food. He wasn't afraid of stepping on their toes. Like, by this time, you should be enjoying steak in your faith, and yet I feel like I've got to give you a bottle because you can't handle anything of substance. What's going on? What happened between where you started and where you are now? And I wonder if he would say the same thing to you if you were sitting before him. What happened? Why all the laziness? Why are you coasting and taking a nap? Why are these goals that you were once excited about, have you just given up on and forgotten? What's going on? In Hebrews 12, verses 1 to 3, these verses essentially exist to do battle with this temptation to coast, to give up, to get lazy. Hebrews 12, 1 to 3 is the climax of the whole book, this whole letter to the Hebrews. Everything before it builds up to it. Everything after kind of flows from it. It's the central command of this whole book. And he writes the key command in that is in verse 1, when he says, let's throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. But everything in the book of Hebrews is pointing towards this command, this exhortation, this plea that we would run with perseverance. He says the race marked out for us, meaning the life that God has called you to. what Paul talks about, the good works prepared in advance for us to do. God has a purpose for you. God has called you to something. There's a race marked out for you. He says, run it with perseverance. To help us with this, he gives us several motivations for running and several means of running. That is, he aims to answer two questions. Why should we run, and how do we run? And I want to focus primarily on the how, but before that, I want to make sure we're grounded in the why. I want to point out at least three. There's more, but I'll draw our attention to three reasons why we should run, and then we'll dwell on how should we run this life of faith. So three motivations provided in this text as to why we should run with perseverance. First, he says in verse 1, that since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. So if you think of the logic, one of the most important things I learned in seminary, and it shouldn't have taken seminary to get this, but some of the most important words in the Bible are not the big theological words, but the simple words like therefore, since, so that. Like, it's the connecting words that show you why these things are written. He says, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and run with perseverance the race marked out for us. So what's the motivation there? Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. What is the cloud? Who is this talking about, and why is it a motivation to run? The cloud of witnesses that he's referring to here is pointing back at chapter 11. Since we're not doing an extended sermon series on the book of Hebrews, it might be easier to miss this, but he just finished. Chapter 11 is sometimes referred to as the Hall of Faith. And these Old Testament heroes of faith are listed one after another as examples for how to run this race well. He's pointing us to all these people who have done it before us. And so we're given these heroes of faith like Noah and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and Moses and Gideon and Barak and David, and there's so many people all listed off, and they are referred to here as witnesses. And I think what it's getting at is that they witness to us by their lives. While it's possible that there are people in heaven with we don't really know for sure. Do people in heaven know what's going on here on earth? I know we're not given a picture of heaven as if God is boring and we're staring at this TV set of planet Earth. What's going on? That's not the picture of heaven. Do people have an idea what's going on? I don't know. But I think what this passage is getting at is not that they're witnessing us as in sitting and staring, but their lives are witnesses to us. Their lives are examples. They have finished the race, and it's as if they're calling out to us saying, I did it and you can too. And so that the author of Hebrews is pointing us back to all these people who said, look at this person. This is how they ran their race perseveringly. And this is what this person did. They are witnesses to us. And that should motivate us. That should move us. We are surrounded, and we don't even have to look to the scriptures. Many of us are blessed to have parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, aunts and uncles, and other heroes of faith as we look to these people who have modeled for us what it looks like to run with perseverance, to run and not give up. People that, I admire my mom so much and things that over the years, and she's just someone who, she's never, to my knowledge, stood up and preached some great sermon in some giant room, but she's just someone who with her life has perseveringly, faithfully pursued God. And we are called to look to people whose lives witness to us saying, this can be done. This can be done. So the first motivation is to look back at people who have done it before us, who have run well. A second motivation to run with perseverance is seen in the description of Jesus in verse 2. We're told to look to Jesus, who's described as the author and perfecter of our faith. The author and perfecter of our faith. The author here doesn't want us to be tempted to think that this race is run in our own strength, by our own abilities, by our own like pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps and just trying harder and we just got to do it. It's not human grit that is the source of our perseverance. He points us to Jesus as the author and the perfecter, the one who began our faith and the one who will see it through to completion. Look to the one, we didn't create our own faith and we're not going to persevere on our own. All that we have is from God. You know, Paul writes at one point, he's like, I have worked harder than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God working in me. Like, yes, we work, and yes, we strive, and yes, there is effort that we give, but it is an effort supplied by the author and perfecter of our faith. We're reminded that we have a God who is sufficient and eager to supply all that we need just when we need it so that we don't have to give up. When you think you've got nothing left, you have a God who is ready to supply what you need to just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Why should we run? One, because we've got examples of so many who have done it before us and are cheering us on by their example. Two, because we have a God who's ready to supply what we need. And a third motivation I see in this passage for running is that there's a joy set before us. Verse 2 tells us that Jesus endured the cross for the joy that was set before him. When he went to the cross, when he was beaten, when he was mocked, when he was spit upon, when he hung there gasping for breath, and at any moment could call down angels to just lift him off and make things all better. Like, I've said this before, one of the reasons I hate running on treadmills is because whenever I feel like it, I can just stop and get off. I after months of not running, on Friday, I'm like, I'm going to get to the gym, and I was on a treadmill, and I got to mile and 3/4, and I'm like, oh, all right, I'm done. And you just step off and you're all done. It's like Jesus could have stepped off the cross at any moment, and yet we're told that he persevered because of the joy set before him. He had a clear picture of this future state of what all of that suffering would accomplish. And it was that joy out in front of him that made him not take the easy route and give up and turn back. It was the joy set before him. And just as joy was Jesus' motivation, it is ours as well. There might be momentary loss, and there inevitably will be temporary pain, but we can endure it for the sake of everlasting joy. And the clearer that picture of joy is for us, the more power of the motivation for us to press on. At the end of chapter 10, here in Hebrews, we're told that early on, this church joyfully accepted the plundering of their property because they knew that they had a better and lasting possession in Jesus Christ. To be a Christian brought on all kinds of persecution. Their houses were taken, their property was plundered, and we're told that they experienced that with joy because they knew they had something that couldn't be taken away. It was joy that enabled them at that time to press on and persevere. Similarly, in Hebrews 11, verse 25, we're told about Moses. And we're told that he chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. Just as the Hebrews early on in their faith pressed on and found motivation from the joy set before him, and just as Moses did the same thing, just as Jesus did the same thing, so it will be for us. The clearer a picture we have of the joy set before us, what God wants to do through us, what he's going to accomplish at the end of these goals, at the end of our life lived with purpose, the clearer that picture is, the more motivation we'll have when things get hard and life bears down and opposition rears its head. So that's why we run. These are three motivations to run. The example of others in the faith, this description of Jesus as the author and perfecter of our faith. He's going to supply what we need, and there's joy set before us. But how? How are we supposed to run this race well? How are we supposed to persevere when things get hard? What does it look like to run well? There are two things that we need to do, and I think both are equally important that are given here in this passage. First, we're told that there are some things that we need to throw off. Look in verse 1. Is therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. I want you to notice something. One of the most powerful insights for me in studying this passage is to realize that he's talking about two different things here, not one. What are we supposed to throw off? First, we're supposed to throw off everything that hinders. And second, the sin that so easily entangles. There are two things here. First, I'll take them in reverse order because the more obvious one that we know about is sin. Oh, yes, we gotta throw off sin. And yes, that's true. Like, we need to throw off sin in our lives, to cast off this sin which so easily entangles. If you're going to run, you need to get rid of the things that tend to trip you up. No one's going to run a race with 8-foot shoelaces that are untied, kind of flopping around. You're setting yourself up to be tangled and tripped. Get rid of the things that tend to trip you up. We have different sins that ensnare us, and what might trip me up more may not be the same for you. I think we're all wired a little bit differently. We all have our different tendencies and proclivities and weaknesses and stumbling blocks. So what is it for you? What are the sins that most easily entangle you, that most easily trip you up? And it's absolutely mandatory that we go to war with those sins, that we do everything we can to rip them away from us. Jesus was like hardcore about this. Like, this was a big deal to him. He says, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. And he wasn't intending like as if lust is going to be stopped by having one less eye. Like, the solution isn't physical, but he's using this graphic imagery to say, don't play around with sin. Go to war with it. Be vigilant. Do whatever it takes. If this thing is tripping you up, then give yourself to ripping that out of your life. Don't play around with it. Do whatever it takes to break free. Sins are like these vines that grow up and entangle us and pin our legs together so that we can't run. And if you have an addiction in your life, you will not run with perseverance the race that God has marked out for you unless you go to war with that addiction and cast it off. Do whatever it takes. Otherwise, this thing will continue to trip you up, will continue to sabotage you, will continue to hold you back. Don't play around. I've used an illustration most often in one-on-one counseling situations. I've probably brought it up at some point from the pulpit. But for me, it's helpful to have an image. I think in kind of a military context, if there were 50 soldiers at the other end of a field, 50 guys at the other end of the field, you could lose 1 million soldiers sending one at a time, right? If you just sent one at a time, year after year, one at a time, you could just lose guys forever. Like, you will never win sending one at a time. But yet, if you sent 500 over at once, you might not lose a single person. Like, and it's all a matter of, like, are you just going to play with this sin? Are you going to do half-hearted measures and have this thing drag on year after year after year in your life? Or are you going to take a period of time and say, these next 3 months, 6 months, whatever it takes, I will go to war. I will be vigilant. I will cut this thing off. I will get help. I will be humble. I will admit what I need to, but this thing will not be in my life 1 year from today. Is that your mindset? Is that how you feel about the sin in your life, or will you hobble along with half measures, losing one guy at a time and never getting victory? If you want to run with perseverance, go to war with sin. Throw it off. But having said that, I want to remind us that sins are not the only things that can keep us from running. We're told to lay aside not only sins, but everything that hinders, everything that weighs us down or threatens to slow us up. There are a lot of things in life that are not sins. that are not inherently wrong, but they won't help you run. They won't help you in your life lived for Jesus. Paul said everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. And there are a million things that might be permissible, but they're not beneficial when it comes to running well. It's not a sin to have friends. It's not a sin to play sports. It's not a sin to play games or to go shopping. But things like these can overtake our lives like weeds and suck all of our energy and all of our attention and keep us from bearing fruit. It's not a sin to watch television. Like, television is not inherent, I mean, some maybe, but television itself is not inherently, objectively sinful. But how many Christians have no time left in their lives to draw near to God, to learn some of the skills and the information it might take to go to war with sin, to learn how to grow in their walk with the Lord and in their effectiveness in evangelism and in their ability to articulate the faith and all these things. There's no time left because TV has gone like and wedges it in and just takes over all the available spare time in your life. Like, TV is not sinful, but it might be something holding you back and weighing you down and keeping you from running. What might it be? And again, just like different sins trip different people up in different ways, like what might weigh someone else down might be totally fine for you. Like, I'm not going to get up here and give these rules about, like, this is what you can't. Yeah, and some churches like to do that. Like, this is exactly how you should dress and how you should spend your time and who you should talk to and all of that. No. But be aware, like, is this thing helping you run or not? Boots and a winter jacket are not bad things, but if you're going to run a race, you might want to change your clothes. You might want to find something else that's not going to feel like you're dragging like 50 pounds of weight with you. Like, find something to help you run. When you're running, you try to cut everything you can that isn't absolutely needed and helpful. And in the ancient Greek games, which is probably what's being alluded to here in terms of running these races, in the Greek games, if you don't know, I mean, they ran naked. Like, we're taking everything off. Like, there is no weight holding me back, you know? And so I'm not, you know, if you take away, well, Caleb said I got to run naked. Okay, good night. And don't tweet that either. But my encouragement for you is, like, spiritually, what would that look like in your life? Like, that is the principle here. How do we strip away everything that's weighing us down, that's holding us back, that's slowing us up? What would it look like to have a life where everything we're doing is aimed at pursuing Jesus Christ and the life that he's called us to? And so the questions we need to ask is not, why can't I do this? Or what's wrong with this? We need to be asking, will this help me run? Not, is this allowable, but is this beneficial? And I've been on this soapbox before. One of the things that I don't think I've said it in a while, but in college, you know, in the summers during college, I worked at a Christian camp for 3 different summers. And one of the things that happened on a regular basis, particularly with junior high and high school groups of campers, is we would have these Q&A sessions. And usually the girls would go with the girl counselors and the guys would go with the guy counselors. And we'd have these kind of Q&A times. And inevitably, especially in junior high and high school, inevitably we'd get the question, how far is too far? And it's always in relation to dating and, like, is kissing too far? Can we hold each other? What can we do this? Like, where's the line? And I grew to despise that question because it's like, it envisions this scenario. If you think of, like, holiness and righteousness and everything that honors God here, and selfishness and sin and evil and rebellion over here, the question, how far is too far, is basically like, how far away from God can I get but still technically be on his side? Like, how close to sin and selfishness can I get but still think, you know, I haven't crossed the line yet? Like, that question, the question itself is the wrong question. Not how far is too far, not how far away from God can I be, but does this help me run? How close to God can I be? How righteous can I be? How God-honoring can I be? Is this thing moving me closer in my relationship with God and towards greater holiness and obedience, or is it moving me away? The point is not to figure out the line, but it's to figure out which way are you facing. What is holding you back? Go to war not only with sins that trip you up, but with things that aren't inherently sinful, but they slow you down and hold you back and take away your attention and your resources from what really matters. So that's, I said there are two means of running, two things that we can do to run after Jesus. The first is to throw off sins that entangle and anything that weighs us down. The other is looking to Jesus. If you want to run well, we're told in verse 2 to fix our eyes on Jesus. The picture there is not just like a passing glance. It's not just looking up to him, but it's like fixating, attaching yourself. I am committing my gaze to stare upon Jesus Christ. It's not only is Jesus the one that started us on this race and sustains us during this race, he is the author and perfecter of our faith, but he's the goal waiting at the finish line at the end of the race for us. If we hope to finish well, we need to fix our eyes on Jesus, who lived this life, who set the example and is waiting for us at the finish line. The Christian life is not a sprint, but a marathon. And churches are far too filled with sprinting Christians rather than these plodding marathoners. And if you've ever run a long race, you know that when you get exhausted and when you get physically weak, the only way to keep going is to have a goal that's fixed in front of you. This joy set before you, this picture of Jesus who's run this race and is waiting for you. You need to keep that goal in mind. A number of years ago, I came across a 60 Minutes interview with Dean Karnazes, who, if you don't know, his nickname is the Ultra Marathon Man. Like, he's probably run more than any human being in history. His longest run ever was 262 miles, 10 back-to-back marathons, all in one go. Like, it boggles. I can't even fathom what that looks like. But he was interviewed and he was asked how he keeps going. And he said he can't do it without a goal. He said that sometimes when he is absolutely exhausted and he can't even think of the finish line, he picks a bush. Maybe you've done this when you're running. He picks a bush a little ways ahead of him. I'm just going to run to that bush. And then you get to the bush. I'm going to go to that sign. And then you get to the sign. I'm just going to get to that telephone pole. And you just, you cannot keep running without something that you're looking to, without some goal that you're striving after. And we're given Jesus as that goal, as that example, as the one who has run the race before us, the one who is waiting for us, the one who is ready to supply what we need. We need to focus on Jesus and run to him. So as we think of making this year count and making our lives count, yes, set goals. And if you haven't done that, I encourage you to. And yes, think about the habits that will move you to those goals. If you haven't done that, I encourage you to. And yes, think about the support and the help, the friends that you will need to keep going. But beyond all of that, you've just got to start in and press on. Cut out anything holding you back and fix your eyes on Jesus and press on. Let's pray. Father God, our lives are littered with abandoned goals and neglected dreams and failed attempts to change. And as we think about this year and what's going to make anything different this time around, I guess I don't know what to say other than we're looking to you. I am still weak and we are still broken. We're looking to you. Jesus, supply what we need as the author and perfecter of our faith. encourage us, empower us, supply our strength, be our goal and our hope, and give us a clearer and clearer vision of that joy with you and for you. Refine any goals that we've started to set that are astray, that are not in alignment with what you would have for us, the race that you've marked out for us. But then help us to put one foot in front of the other and start running in a way that, though the progress might be slow, the goal is sure. So help us. In your name we pray. Amen.